I am really interested in how physical and intellectual or conceptual architectures inform one another. So libraries and archives and the places where people make media, media company, headquarters, for example, are all different types of architectural spaces that I've written about. And in those particular spaces, you have to think about how various classification systems, ways of organizing media, ways of organizing labor are made manifest or concrete in a physical space. So just that translation between the material and the conceptual is really what's very interesting to me. And I'm particularly interested in the physical spaces of libraries and archives because particularly today in this digital age, which has been around for quite some time now, a lot of people forget that there is a lot going on, not only behind the scenes that requires heavy architecture, labor, space for people to work, but also for the patrons themselves who might even be accessing primarily digital material. There is still an physical embodied experience there that the physical space can bring a place or can provide a place for people to come together. So those physical buildings, those architectures are still very much relevant in a virtual age. There are a lot of academics and artists and designers who are very interested in what a lot of them term making visible the invisible. It's actually become a bit of a trite phrase. A lot of people use it anymore. And part of it is inspired by a desire to show all of the supposed invisible labor, invisible systems, invisible infrastructure that happens to make digital culture possible. So there are people who are doing things like a lot of art projects, photography projects about mapping data centers, mapping transoceanic cables, mapping satellites. So all the things that bring our media to us that tend to be outside of everyday visibility. There are lots of attempts to visualize them. I'm particularly interested in what going beyond the visual can offer. So seeing how other modes of rendering things sensible, rendering them kind of audible or tangible in other ways can help us to understand these infrastructures also. In terms of archives and libraries, I think people are interested not only in the physical hardware behind the system, but also the labor, the intellectual structures, the classification systems, how metadata is designed. So I think people are wanting to essentially provide some critical perspective on these things that we haven't tended to look at or think critically about because they're often hidden or behind closed doors. Well, I'm interested in all kinds of sound. I really am interested in sound art. When I started to think about, started to study architecture, particularly the architecture of various media spaces about 15 years ago, most of the architecture criticism and theory I was reading really presented these buildings as spaces that we conceive of and experience primarily through our eyes. So people did talk about things like circulation, how a body kinesthetically moves through space, but there wasn't a lot of attention paid to so there's a growing interest in this thing called sound studies. So a lot of people are looking at, actually there's a visual metaphor to think about it. People are listening to sound is something that we have to examine critically as well. So how we archive sound is something that's worth thinking about. How people experience sound in different physical spaces is something that's worth considering. And the sonic, just the sonic ambient qualities of particularly libraries where you have to accommodate silent private study all the way up through children's rooms, which are really loud, collaborative spaces which make a lot of noise. So acoustics are particularly interesting and important in spaces like these. Well, you could think about all these different, you could also kind of make just a whole bunch of different sentences with a different preposition in them. So like media in space, media about space, kind of the space of media. So the impact or the relationship between digital media and urban space kind of takes all those different permutations. So for a long time, people have thought about how digital technologies, even in the design process, have transformed the forms of buildings and urban spaces that people are designing. Of course, today we have kind of media embedded in urban space. We have things like this concept of the smart city, sentient cities, a lot of kind of ubiquitous computing. So digital media have myriad relationships to urban space, both shaping the form they take, their evolution, informing and maybe ideally making more efficient their infrastructures, changing the way people navigate through them. So just fill in a different preposition and there's likely to be some type of impact of digital media on urban space and vice versa.